Welcome back to The Right Ingredients. Today's episode is one I've really been looking forward to because it challenges something that's almost taken as fact in our industry. The flavours industry has always been built on relationships, technical expertise, and long development cycles. It's not a transactional model, and for good reason. But at the same time, we're seeing pressure from outside, fast-moving brands changing buyer expectations and a wider shift towards more digital ways of working. So the question for today is this: can parts of the flavours industry actually be modernised? And more specifically, can any part of it realistically move towards something like e-commerce without losing what makes the industry work? Joining me today is Mahbir Thukral. Mahbir has spent over 15 years working across marketing, innovation, and commercial strategy, with the last 9 years focused specifically within B2B specialty ingredients. Now, most recently, he was Global Director of Marketing Technology and Customer Experience at International Flavours and Fragrances, where he led digital transformation initiatives across multiple business units. Now, what's particularly interesting and very relevant to today's discussion is that he built and scaled one of IFF's first global e-commerce platforms, helping improve sample-to-purchase conversion and integrating digital tools directly into how commercial teams operate. Before that, he led global innovation activation marketing, working closely with R&D, commercial, and key accounts to bring new flavor and ingredient solutions to market. So he's been on both sides of this, the traditional model and the push towards something more digital. Mahbir, welcome. Great to have you on.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Really happy to be here.
Excellent. Let's start with the reality of how the industry works today. The flavours industry has traditionally been built on long-term relationships, technical selling, and close collaboration between commercial and R&D teams. From your perspective, why has the industry evolved in this way, and what makes it fundamentally different from more transactional ingredient categories?
Well, flavor development is a co-created process, and by that, I mean the brief matters, the application matters, the market positioning matters as well. Dairy, bakery, beverage, each require very different stability profiles and regulatory compliance paths. Whereas with more transactional ingredients, broadly speaking, switching suppliers tends to be a bit more viable. Whereas with flavors, suppliers mid-development can be expensive. Reformulation costs can cost time and cost money. And then buyers are staying loyal because an alternative means a full restart.
Is the complexity of the product the main driver behind that, do you think?
In my opinion, yes, it is. I think with flavors, technical selling requires application knowledge, not just product knowledge, because you're solving a formulation problem, not just quoting a price.
Okay. You made an interesting point there around technical selling not really being about product knowledge, but solving the formulation problems. I mean, do you think that's something people outside of the industry underestimate a lot of the time?
For sure. But the comparison is not that commodity ingredients are simpler. Actually, the contrast is where with each sector positions its value. Commodity tends to compete on price, where flavors, they compete on technical expertise. In my opinion, that's a commercial choice, not necessarily a hierarchy. And that, there's value in both. And what we've seen with the mega mergers recently in the industry, because it's been accelerating to bring this together, feeding off this notion that one approach can feed off the other to have greater influence in the industry and also in the minds with customers. And if I give examples like from where I was previously at IFF, initially acquiring Frutarom, and then merging with DuPont's nutrition and biosciences business. And then you look at DSM and Firmenich, Symrise and Diana Foods. So the logic behind each, I believe, has been the same. A broader portfolio means a higher share of the overall formulation mix. And that's pushed then flavor houses further into technical territory.
Yeah, I see that totally. And you brought it up there, the mega mergers that are happening across the industry, DSM, Firmenich, Symrise, IFF, your previous company, looking to become more sort of broader solution providers rather than what they're principally known as, which was F&F houses or flavor houses. Do you think that pushed the industry even further into technical selling?
The honest challenge is that flavor houses tend to speak to procurement. through a technical lens. Or they go in the other direction and focus with trends and consumer insight, which are both necessary and justified to a point, but neither really directly addresses the customer's actual pain points or the opportunities that they need to act on in the short to mid-term. And I think the industry is underselling itself, and this is very broadly speaking, the industry underselling itself by communicating, in a way, complexity instead of addressing the immediate value that it can bring to address those immediate problems.
Interesting. Communicating complexity instead of value. I could see that. Do you think flavor houses occasionally, how can I put it, undersell themselves by overcomplicating the message of what they're trying to deliver?
Flavor houses, as I said, it's led with R&D investment as a differentiator. If you look at a lot of the first quarter results, all the flavor houses, when they make their announcements for the investors, are really focusing on the R&D.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the commercial, the marketing, and the technical teams all carrying that message to the customer. So, the expertise there is real. But the question I would be asking if I was, in the position is whether what is getting communicated is value, or is it actually adding complexity in how the business relationship is being conducted? Is
Mm-hmm.
a immediate thought process for when a customer is sharing a brief with one of the flavor houses?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important point, because at the same time, customer behavior outside of the industry has changed massively over the last few years. And at the same time, we're seeing clear shifts in the market, smaller and faster moving brands, shorter product development cycles, and changing buyer expectations. What changes are you seeing that are starting to challenge the traditional model of F&F?
Smaller brands are no longer a niche. The proof is that the bigger players, what exactly they're doing right now. When we look at standout smaller brands emerging 15 years ago, what was the usual way to go? Multinationals would then try to replicate that success internally, starting from zero. Now they're acquiring it. If you look at how PepsiCo has acquired Sita Foods for 1.2 billion in 2024, Nestle acquiring Vital Proteins, Unilever acquiring Liquid IV. The pattern is consistent across markets. And if we look recently, the McCormick and Unilever Foods combination, which was about 7-8 weeks ago, is really the most recent signal of a 44.8 billion deal, creating a combined portfolio of 20 billion in revenue. And that's, it's bringing brands like Knorr, Frank's Red Hot under one roof. Strategic logic is scale and flavor focus at a global level. And that tells you where I think the industry really believes the value sits, is that with all these different suppliers, how can we, in a way, consolidate both with the supply, but also with the sourcing, given the fact that pricing and geopolitical situations are squeezing margins.
Yeah. And on that topic of smaller brands no longer being niche and being bought up by these big multinationals, how much pressure do you think that puts on flavor houses to move faster here?
So I've seen it on both sides. So as someone who has worked in this industry for over a decade, but I've also launched my own consumer brand, I've advised a lot of startups. And the barrier to entry for a startup to create a product, to launch it, to bring it to market, has dropped significantly. And to be honest, smaller flavor houses are filling that gap. They are now supplying at speed and in smaller quantities. You see in the flavor industry has historically, I remember the term IFF was called the black box. If you were not in it, you didn't know how it worked. And generative AI tools have changed that. It's not as a replacement for technical validation, but as a sort of starting point. And that alone, removing the ceiling that traditionally kept smaller brands out for years. And, researching before the call, LinkedIn has changed supplier access entirely, reaching the right person in a major flavor house. It used to take months if you were lucky to get through. And LinkedIn has kind of opened that up. The friction is largely, and I think the pressure has been originally consumer driven and it's flowed upstream. If a trending ingredient or format appears on social media, brands cannot take 2 years to respond. And that applies to your Unilevers and your Mondelez, as well as it does now to startups. So when suppliers can't at speed, that becomes a friction point.
Yep. And with that, social media and trend cycles compressing innovation timelines from, as you said, from years into weeks in some categories, are flavor companies struggling to keep pace with that, in your opinion?
I think it's partially true and it's partially used as a shield. And with that, I mean, the technical complexity of creating a flavor, creating a formulation is real. I'm not denying that.
Of course.
But the resistance to modernization is a separate thing, which is dressed up in a way for the same argument. The major houses have enough monopoly for long enough that they could enforce their own timelines. And, this is probably a bit positive, but this has changed with smaller flavor houses taking territory. For example, where I'm here in Dubai, there is Global Flavors and Fragrances producing locally. In Europe, European flavor fragrances are also doing a lot of replication. And so there's really an opportunity which they're tapping into. And maybe some of these smaller houses don't necessarily match the same depth when it comes to technical expertise, but they do offer flavor matching, solid quality, and speed. And for a growing number of customers, that's more than enough. That's sufficient.
Exactly, yeah. Do you think the pressure is being driven more by customers or from within the industry itself, though?
For sure, customers first. That sequence matters because, the consumer behavior is changing. Customers are pressured to do it. Brand loyalty to A brands has weakened. Private label is generally competitive, and social media trends have compressed the MPD timelines from years to weeks in some categories. So however much on trends try to be, with flavor houses presenting, these are the new market trends, insights, and consumer behaviors, the industry is not actually leading that shift. It is responding to it. What I've seen across the market is quite uneven too.
What about perception? I mean, perception in the flavors industry is some people think that it's slow to change. Do you agree with that?
As with first-hand experience, I've worked alongside industry veterans as well as new generations entering the space. And there is a genuine disconnect between what the veterans perceive as to be possible and what younger professionals expect. And I think that gap is not going to be closing on its own. And this friction is contributing towards this necessity to expedite modernization in the industry.
Yeah. And do you think that gap is becoming more visible now?
Most definitely. Like anyone starting their career, the industry one chooses to enter is a conscious choice. And there are industries and companies that didn't even exist 10 years ago. And like, the revolution years before, we're now living in, right now, this digital revolution. And as many people as many people who are watching and listening to this podcast will know, Gen Zers are the first digital native generation. They they have inherent capabilities that they expect to apply irrespective of the industry they're operating in. And from any of those entering the flavor industry, to be honest, there's going to be quite a bit of a shock for both sides.
Yeah. And I think that leads quite naturally into the digital discussion, because customer expectations today, as you've said, are completely different to what they were even 5 or even 10 years ago. When people talk about digitalization or e-commerce, especially within flavors, opinions tend to be, from my experience, quite polarized. From your experience, where do you actually see digital tools or e-commerce models working effectively in this industry today?
Big flavor houses are investing in internal digital tools. Expediting creation, generating new product ideas, monitoring social media trends, signals that feed into the R&D and the creation development. And that has value. But what I would challenge is whether that this is actually market differentiation or simply the standard outcome of having the access to modern tools. Is the customer feeling the impact of this investment directly? One's own modernization doesn't deliver value unless the customer directly benefits. Now, I'm a strong advocate for democratizing access. The needs of a smaller beverage brand are not the same as a global multinational, period. And that's, across digital tools make it easier in order to be able to identify who the right category specialist is and how to reach them. And that was not even possible 5-6 years ago. But not every application needs a custom flavor. New brands and limited editions, those products, they often work with using a flavor, a standard bank flavor from a catalog. If the brief is clear and the application is straightforward, digital ordering has the potential to remove the friction without compromising on the quality. A small brand ordering a lemon flavor does not need a 6-month supplier onboarding and development process to be able to bring their product to market.
I think that's really interesting in terms of where you've put that, in terms of not every application needs a custom flavor. I think digital models work particularly well where briefs are already clear and straightforward. When they're a little bit more complex, it becomes a bit more difficult. But when it's clear and straightforward, I think that's what the customers are looking for.
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing that with B2B ingredient marketplaces that are starting to pop up. They're operating in North America, Europe, and India. And, to call out platforms like Want to Taste and Noda are proving that buyer demand for digital access is real. And I saw this firsthand at IFF when we launched IFF Product Finder 2.
Is it more about improving accessibility and speed rather than replacing the traditional, sometimes expansive sales process?
Indeed, it's about accessibility and speed. And it's not about replacing the technical conversation. But not every customer needs that conversation at the same point in their journey. A major FCPG brand running a complex reformulation project needs a different interaction to then a smaller brand ordering a standard flavor for a limited edition run. I think the mistake, especially today, is trying to mirror that same model across all.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I want to check your opinion on this, this would open the door to engaging with very different types of customers as well, particularly smaller or early stage brands that need these products now.
Historically, I say historically, but it's also not that recent, because I've faced instances where advising startups and they've had the same challenge. Like a 1 kilo size package or a sample request to a major flavor house, it went nowhere before.
Yeah.
The account was considered to be too small to justify the cost to serve. Digital models, it makes that transaction commercially viable. And the broader argument is then about concentration risk. And I get that for, the major players. A business that is built entirely on global key accounts, and we're seeing this in, current times, is that they're more exposed when one of their accounts moves in a different direction. With McCormick and Unilever, there is going to be some shakiness in the market with their other suppliers. And I think having a diversified customer base, which includes smaller brands, changes that equation entirely.
You mentioned earlier platforms like Node and Want to Taste. Do you think the customer appetite for digital access is already there? And the real issue is that many ingredient companies simply aren't operationally set up for it.
The bottleneck is not on the buyer side. Most ingredient suppliers are not operationally set up to fulfill a digital order at speed. It's not a technology problem. It requires the right internal stakeholders to sit around the table and remove the practical roadblocks in their own internal operations.
And you yourself, you work directly on IFF Product Finder, which is industry renowned as a good tool from my understanding. But from your experience, what did that teach you about what customers actually want from digital tools?
We built IFF Product Finder to give distributors and customers self-serve access to anchor flavors, sample requests, pricing, and documentation, alongside IFF's vast bank of consumer and market trends. And we built it in record time, what I would consider by our industry standards. And that matters because the internal challenge was connecting enough data points across the organization internally to populate the content for the platform accurately. And that created friction before launch. I won't say it was easy breezy. But when we did it in live markets, the response from distributors and customers was clear. The appetite for this model exists. The industry is just not caught up operationally.
But equally, there are obviously areas where digital simply can't replace the human side of the industry.
For sure. We go back to not having a blanket approach. complex custom applications require iterative sensory evaluation. You need to have those people in the room, those same people in the room, the product. There is no digital substitute for a trained panel evaluating a reformulation across multiple iterations. Also, high-stake reformulations with regulatory and stability implications. The liability alone is going to be relationship-based. A digital workflow does not have that responsibility. And then early-stage projects requiring formulation, collaboration, NDAs, IPA protection, it's significantly harder to manage in a digitally first environment. I think whenever there's too many variables of risk, digital tools can be then a collaborator in the process, but not a like-for-like replacement.
Yeah, that's pretty much where digitalization or e-commerce really clearly doesn't work within the flavors industry. I think you made a good point there that digital works well when the brief is defined, but not necessarily when the customer doesn't really know what they want yet. Do you think there are certain parts of flavor development that will always remain heavily relationship driven?
For sure. And that's exactly that. But even when the customer does know what they want, I still believe that there is a role for the supplier customer relationship. And I give you an example, like in trust first markets, like in the GCC, I'm in Dubai at the moment, but also in African countries, in Latam, Mediterranean, parts of Asia, the relationship comes before the transaction. Digital accelerates an existing relationship. It does not build a new one from scratch. And I saw that directly, like when we had rolled out IFF's product finder e-commerce platform in Eastern Europe and Southern African market. The relationship with the distributor and the customer was already there. And the clear pain point was that how could IFF expedite certain processes at speed, give access to the information? IFF Product Finder addressed that piece. It democratized the access to the catalogs and the product information, but it did not replace the sales team. It kind of it opened the black box. Customers gained the freedom to see what was available, but then, to consider trialing independently. And then the sales account manager becomes a sort of the wrapper around that experience, ensuring adoption, opportunities, repeat purchase. So the digital platform becomes then the entry point, and then the human relationship is the conversion mechanism.
Yeah, you're slightly off topic, but you're speaking to the converted there because that is the recruitment industry. That is what we are going through in terms of executive search and recruitment and those sort of areas. Is you do need that human element. Yes, you can go on different AI technology that will tell you, I can recruit this position for you. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to executive search, it's very much about relationship building, very much about that trust that you have between two parties.
Yeah, for sure.
Going back to what we're speaking about here, I mean, do you think some markets will naturally adopt digital models slower than others?
Markets, I think it's more about, there is no kind of country on this planet, except a few which are somewhat blocked, where digital adoption is at a infancy phase. It's more about adapting to local nuances and the way that digital models are embedded into those individual habits. For example, many countries in Africa are mobile first versus, say, for example.
Yep. Interesting. And is there a risk that some businesses try to force digital solutions into areas where they don't really fit just yet?
Yeah. And I'm seeing it frequently, to be honest with you, Charlie. The pressure to demonstrate AI adoption is real, especially from a communication standpoint.
Yeah.
Companies, they want to signal to the market that they're modernizing, but the risk is then implementing tools just because they're visible rather than they're actually solving a clear problem, a pain point.
Yeah. I think that's important there about businesses implementing AI or digital tools just for visibility and signaling modernization rather than genuinely improving the customer experience, or in some cases I've seen not really using them internally at all. And if you've got nobody championing these products internally, then nothing's really going to get moving, get forward. I mean, we're already seeing some of that happening, right?
Yes, I've seen elaborate digital platforms across multiple, especially, the big companies, where there's the intention to create a modernized virtual digital experience. And in essence, it's just to present content. And in my belief, you're adding complexity without actually adding value. An immersive
Hmm.
virtual environment built to deliver marketing content with AI generated testimonials is still presenting the same information that would sit in a PowerPoint slide. The tool is become the message, but the content hasn't changed. And the
Hmm.
customer then has to work harder to get the same answer. The question I would be asking as a digital transformation professional in the industry is that before any digital implementation, does it make it easier for the customer to get what they need and what they want to do? Does it make it more interesting for us to be present there? Those are completely different objectives. And then they produce different outcomes to go with intention.
So where we're at this point is it sounds like the answer isn't one or the other. It's not fully traditional and it's not fully digital either. So let's give a little bit more insight here from your perspective, Mahbir. What does a realistic hybrid model look like for flavor businesses going forward then?
So I think the hybrid model is the way that it's going to be, it should be doing right now, is the way that it's going to be going, because human relationship is still where the relationships, it begins. And I
Hmm.
think that there's a role for digital where it runs in parallel. And I think some good reference points is actually not within our industry. If you look at, like, for example, airlines, Emirates Airline, for example, or food delivery apps like Uber Eats, you have a very sophisticated digital journey across their website, app, and socials. But if you need to speak to a person, you can get, within one or two AI prompts, you're immediately speaking to a human. The digital platform does not replace the human being, it sits alongside it. And I think that's where the flavor industry in general needs to be building towards. And I don't think many organizations are close to that point yet.
Yeah. I think your comparison there and how the digital layer removes friction, but human support is still immediately accessible when needed is definitely important. I mean, do you think the flavor industry is still quite far away from that level of customer experience?
For the digital layer, yes. I think, customer experience is not a premium add-on that you put because you're ordering a large quantity or you have a complex brief. And it needs to be present at every scale of the company, whether it's a
Hmm.
1K order or a 100 kg order. Both require the person to be needed. And I think the digital platforms can handle the transaction, but the human should always be there to handle the relationship. It's maintaining that brand consistency, and part of that brand consistency is customer service.
So go on then, where are you already seeing this work well in practice?
So a few companies I would like to call out. For example, Azelis, Robitet, Carry,
Hmm.
they've all made a sort of first step, in my opinion. Products are available on their websites. It also has launched an extensive catalog. So there is some
Hmm.
digital presence.
Yep.
But varying degrees. I've seen some, catalogs to be a little bit incomplete. Market coverage is a bit inconsistent because they're focused on certain markets versus being available in others if you try to access it. And the user experience yet is not really optimized. We have a web shop, but we're not thinking about, okay, how do we optimize this platform for really making, when there's drop-offs, are we analyzing this, where we can upsell to customers who've got existing orders. The starting point, though, as a positive, it exists. It's there. The strategy there behind it still needs some work. And I think the flavor industry in general, it has not reached that level of sophistication you see in other sectors. When it comes to genuine customer forward digital experience, the digital tools are present, a digital centric commercial strategy, one that is built around customer insights, analytics, and a mapped out customer journey is largely absent, and really an opportunity there.
Hmm. Many businesses, I think, in our industry have built the digital front door, but not necessarily the wider customer journey around it. As you said, I mean, do you think that's where the real gap now sits?
Yes, I think for sure, because you can't obtain the order or the lead and then you take 1 month to follow up with the customer.
Hmm.
Companies need to be wholeheartedly behind this in our industry, and it needs to
Hmm.
be advocated across the board, by the board down, with each and every employee in every team and department. I believe the gap is leadership prioritization. And I've seen this
Right. Okay.
firsthand, not only where I have been, but also the many, the industry is very interconnected, speaking with peers, and the industry has not yet got a generation of senior leaders who truly understand what a 3 to 5 year digital strategy produces. I get short-term commercial targets take precedence, but the strategic investment then in digital gets deferred till later and then later and later.
Interesting. And this is probably the area I find most interesting personally, because all of this eventually comes back to people, what I operate in. And I'd like to bring this back to the people I'm hiring within this space, as this is where I personally see a lot of friction. Many companies are talking about modernizing, but are still hiring profiles built for a very traditional model. Do you think that there is a gap there?
For sure. The gap is real. And most organizations are still hiring for profiles that made sense 15 years ago. Digital acuity is now a must have for any commercial, marketing, or technical role in the industry. You
Mm-hmm.
can't say that having the ability to use Copilot, but actually having a genuine capacity to navigate within digital systems and it being a no brainer. Adopting
Mm-hmm.
new tools along existing capabilities mean both to the to the customer relationship, and that profile is not what most job descriptions in this industry are screening for right now.
No, not at all. You mentioned digital acuity becoming a genuine must-have skill, not just basic IA usage, but the ability to work naturally across digital systems, data, and customer-facing tools. It's areas that I know a lot of people train themselves up, especially post-COVID, to really sort of integrate themselves with a variety of different tools to extend their careers further. Do you think commercial and technical roles need to evolve as the model evolves as well, though?
Yes, flavor houses are making concerted efforts to digitalize their internal infrastructure, but that requires effective change management as well. And the resistance is significant. Unless a flavorist or a marketeer is digitally native or has a strong personal interest in the space, the friction is real. And that friction does not stay internal because
Mm-hmm.
it reaches the customer where they're not able to take that conversation on these topics to another level. And in my opinion, the customer should always be the priority. So if you're not doing it for yourself, do it for the customer.
Yep. And do you think we're going to see more hybrid roles then in that case? People who understand technical selling, but also digital tools, customer analytics, and data, things like that?
They exist, but they've
Yeah, of
largely
course.
arrived in the organizations, these functions by accident rather than
Mm-hmm.
design. My own path is a great example of that. I came from a traditional customer marketing background, engaging with customers, making my PowerPoints, and I was fortunate enough to have a great manager who at the time saw that I was proactively leveraging digital tools and had a genuine interest in the space. And she pushed me to the customer facing digital transformation role, advocating that there is benefits for the business and this, and then creating the role. And then when I was leading marketing technology at IFF, it was a completely brand new role. And so then from the conversations I've been having with peers in the industry of late, especially the last few months, that pattern is pretty consistent. The people who are tending to drive the digital agenda in organizations, in the flavor houses, are typically those who have been moved into newly created positions. They weren't necessarily hired from the outside to come in.
Why do you think the industry has struggled to intentionally hire for those capabilities?
I think talent movement within the industry, as you know as well, tell you better. It tends
Mm-hmm.
to stay with really a set of companies. And that is partially the nature of such a specialized technical space, but it also means that the same profiles circulate. And I think if I were an employer in this industry right now, my concern would be, okay, it's not only about upskilling existing teams, but it's then how do you make the flavor industry genuinely attractive to the next generation of talent?
Now, I think I know your answer to this next question, but from your experience, do you think current teams are actually equipped to adopt to these changes?
I think Gen Zers they're challenging the status quo
Mm-hmm.
across every aspect of work, and we
Yep.
mentioned them, with their influences being digitally native, and they want employers also who share their values, and that also includes enabling them to use those tools and methodologies that are second nature to them, and the
Mm-hmm.
ability to work on projects. I think this ideal of like you'll be working with major global brands is not a sufficient draw on its own anymore. And most of the industry is not yet in a position to offer the working environment that this generation expects.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think with Gen Z's expectations changing across technology, flexibility, working environments, those sort of things. I think, do you think, well, how can I put this question? Do you think the flavors industry currently looks attractive enough to that next generation of talent coming through?
So in a space where it's as exciting and innovative as the flavor industry, I always say, to friends who are starting out in the industry, we kind of play God with what people are going to eat next. I think there's always room for progress, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I think there's always definitely room to progress this industry forward, and having that next generation of talent coming in, it's just about making sure that we move with the rest of the other industries that are out there, and progressing things forward, I think, is super important. What about in terms of what businesses are trying to do, in terms of businesses trying to modernize the model without modernizing the people? Do you think they are focusing too much on the model rather than the people, or the other way around?
Frequently. Like, I think, a new digital platform, a CRM rollout, or an AI tool announcement is not commercial transformation. If a team presenting to the customer has not changed how they work, the investment, which was the spend in the digital transformation, does not reach the customer.
Yeah. What about skills, do you think? What skills do you think will become more important over the next 3 to 5 years for people looking to extend their career, move up within their career, or even just coming into the industry?
I think the deeper problem in most organizations is not necessarily advertising for this hybrid profile, what actually the industry needs. I think it's a candidate who combines the technical knowledge, having commercial instinct, and a genuine digital capability is exactly what modernizing the industry requires right now. And those people exist. I think it's the job description that describes them accurately is rare.
Yep.
I've bet seen in the last few months also, in my search, that very few that did being able to elevate the digital capabilities in that profile or in that department.
I think there's no question that businesses today, when it comes to hiring, I mean, they would prioritize extremely different profiles compared to what they were hiring in terms of 5 to 10 years ago. Do you think?
So during my time at IFF, I also led an initiative to drive industry engagement with those from marginalized backgrounds. Why? Because I didn't stem from STEM industries myself. And I think that the industry needs to start embracing talents from untraditional backgrounds and unconventional professional experience much more.
Yeah, I think there's always a need for different ways of thinking. We have the big flavor houses, the Simrise, IFFs, Givaudan's, and you're not too surprised when you see a senior executive from Givaudan has moved to Simrise, or a senior executive from Simrise has moved to DSM-Firmenich. I think the industry still relies heavily on recycling talent from the same group of companies, rather than bringing in new talent from the outside. Do you agree on that?
Broadly speaking, yes. For specific technical roles, if you're hiring for flavors, you need to have certain qualities and expertise to be a flavorist.
Yeah.
But, for many other roles, there's room to look wider. It's not about playing it safe. For an industry that is fueled in innovation, we should know too well that innovation originates when you have varied and creative thinking and approaches around the table.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to close, and I think this brings everything together. If you were building a flavor company from scratch today, with everything that we've discussed in today's podcast, would you design it in the same way the industry currently operates?
No.
I thought so.
If that was not clear by the way this conversation. How would I do it? Okay. I think the first decision I would make is to separate the catalog business from the custom development business from day one. They have very different commercial models, different buyer journeys, and different hiring profiles. Running them as one business with one approach, it just creates a lot of internal confusion and external inconsistency. I would invest then in digital discoverability from the start. And my outreach strategy would be content and impact first, not technically heavy. There's a lot of learnings that can take, for example, from influencers. And I'm not saying influencers say on Instagram, TikTok, and Rednote. I'm talking also on LinkedIn. Flavor houses are an investment. It's great news for the investors, but it's not always irrelevant to the problem a customer is trying to solve. Let's be honest, buyers were also, they're also consumers. especially with distributors, owner customers, even larger brands on limited edition or trend-led projects. The human element has to, I think, come back in. We're not just selling a technical solution. You're speaking to someone who understands consumer behavior because they live it also. And I think communication, engagement between flavor houses and customers needs to reflect that.
You mentioned they're separating catalog business from custom development from day one. Why do you think the industry has historically tried to operate both under the same commercial model?
I think because one, internally, it's been somewhat operationally easier to manage. And two, there is belief that every catalog purchase will eventually lead to a higher value custom development, which all of us in the industry knows too well that this isn't always the case, and not every flavor business can operate like that. I think too many flavor houses try to present this whole full service when they are stronger in specific applications or specific competencies, and a clear positioning would then build trust with the right targeted customers than having a broad one that we are everything to everyone. And I would be recommending building a more flexible expertise model, whereas project-based technical input is, rather than for the same overhead, is not applied to every account and purchase, so that not every customer needs that same level of support. And then you price that based on what is then the commercial priorities. Because otherwise, if you try to offer everybody to everything, to everyone, it ends up being a commercial end goal because it's value for money and, with the big global accounts, but you're not getting the good ROI for the smaller ones. And I think then a relationship first model for complex custom work, that should stay exactly how it is. It shouldn't have to change, but I would stop using it to justify every part of the business where in some cases, a faster, more accessible, more honest model is clearly better for, say, for example, catalog first customers. And then I think,
Yeah.
just to as a closing part for me is that I'm not pessimistic about the industry. I shared the validated insights in order to strengthen what the industry is bringing to customers.
Yep, for sure. Some great points there, Mahbir. And I think that's probably the perfect place to leave it, because ultimately, this isn't really a conversation about whether flavors go digital or not. It's more about understanding where digital genuinely adds value, where relationships still matter most, and whether the industry is willing to evolve around changing the customer expectations rather than relying on the same models that have been used for decades. And linked to that, what kind of people and skill sets the industry is going to need moving forward. Mahbir, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective. It's been some really interesting insights in this discussion. So thank you so much for joining. Thanks again, Mahbir, and thank you to everybody listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please make sure to follow, share, and subscribe to the Right Ingredients podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Goodbye.